Right, morning everyone. Chris here for 203, and I'm doing week 6 this time. Yes, it's a little bit later than normal. I've had a fairly hectic school holidays, as I suspect some of the rest of you will. So, um, yeah, things got a little bit put off last week. Anyway, still well within the 10 working day time frame for you guys, so hopefully it's not going to throw a spanner in anybody's works. I just wanted to show you 3 of the images from the Rembrandt lighting this week that absolutely nailed getting that lovely triangle on the cheek. And so yes, if any of yours are in there, well done. And as usual, I'll go through the rest of the assignments and mark them individually. So Justin, that means you're first up. Right, so Justin, let's have a look at yours. And I'm had to look at this for a while, and I ended up giving up on trying to work out what it actually was. Ended up going to your thing. I actually originally thought it was more like a jellyfish. The red colour in the cloud as um, the making the cloud red didn't really add to the story, and there was nothing there to give context. Had you had a hose pipe or something giving you the water spraying through and painted the cloud in, that would have been a much more interesting take on this assignment rather than just entirely basing it on the light source as the source of the image. It would have also been nice to get some of those blacks actually looking black rather than having some of your exposure, your background overexposed or just noisy. And also compositionally, it's very crammed in close to the top. Lots of room on the sides, and there's no compositional tools there to help you um, view it. Potentially, if you'd gone and put this in a much bigger picture and had this on the thirds, it might have helped, but then it would need more context to fill in rather than just having the blank space. But certainly a little bit more room, top and bottom, would have been good. In terms of your baby, you're almost there in terms of the Rembrandt lighting. You need to come back a little bit more to give you the full triangle on the cheek. And you need to watch your exposure. You've blown out your highlights, and that should be something that you're always keeping an eye on. Now, lastly, in terms of your justification, all you did was told me your inspiration. You didn't actually justify why you used any of the settings. You didn't justify why you used your composition or anything else. So please make sure you do that. It's about 5 to 10% of your assignment mark every time you don't put that description in, so it is well worth doing. Plus, it gives me an idea as to what you're thinking, and if I know what you're thinking and how you went about stuff, then I can actually potentially help and give you some further ideas and feedback. Right, Sean, let's have a look at yours. And I love the idea of having a person playing the piano. I think had you been able to stick one of those keys down so that the piano actually looked like it was being played with, and I would have played with the composition more to have this offset a little bit more on the thirds you're getting there, but you know the thirds is a good tool to utilize, and have him reaching at, or her reaching out to a key over here is going to give you some sense of movement within the image. But I think for concept wise, it's a very good idea. The other thing is it looks like you might have used the on-camera flash to light the piano, which isn't such a great option. I may be maligning you on that one. No, it didn't fire. Okay, but you've used light coming directly from the same point as the camera, whereas it would be better to light up the piano with the light coming across and utilizing the shadows. But it's still a good job, and your justification in terms of the fact that 30 seconds was long enough for you to do, and yes, you could have gone over with using bulk mode, using a low ISO so that you don't have too much noise, etc. Works quite well. And yeah, you've got rid of there's no clutter around the rest of the image, which is good from a compositional point of view. Your baby is a little bit underexposed and a little bit on the blue side, so I would pull the color balance back a little bit more. Actually, interestingly, just the way that Lightroom works is you play with the color balance that way, it actually pushes the brightness up anyway. In terms of the triangle on the cheek, yep, you've got that happening quite nicely. And it's an interesting one with the baby's head to get Rembrandt lighting to work, because the noses are quite small, but you've still managed it, so well done on that one. Right, Jen, and you've got a burning bin, which I think is an interesting one to do, and I really like how those flames have come out. It's a bit of a shame that the lines that you've got leading to the bin actually keep going. It would have been nice if you'd managed to find an angle where that line actually was blocked potentially by these bushes, so that you actually ended up with the line actually stopping at the rubbish bin. It's nice to see that you've lit up this bottom piece, which is good, although you have left what looks to be the cell phone or the light at the bottom still in there. And given that we're burning the bin, a little bit of post-production, or potentially even just chucking a gel over the original, could have been quite useful from the point of view of pushing the colour. Blue's probably not the best option really, it actually wants to be a let's try that again. Let's try that with a reddy orange. There we go, the orange works. And actually make it look like the whole bin's on fire and starting to glow. And then of course your minor manipulation to clone out the stuff at the bottom of the bin where we don't want it. That's going to be an interesting one to try and clone out, but yeah, it might need a couple of clones to get rid of it. Let's see how that works. Still needs a bit more fine tuning, but you get the idea. It just gets rid of that as a distraction. But yeah, certainly an interesting idea, and one that I would keep playing with. But yeah, getting your composition to those leading lines to really actually help lead and stop at the object would be good. In terms of your Rembrandt, a little bit underexposed, and I'd probably tweak the white balance as well in your final image, and of course it's out of focus but fuzzy. That lot doesn't actually matter. The slight exposure issue, that does. Yeah, you've just about caught that Rembrandt lighting on that cheek, so there is the triangle there. I think you've got a bit too much ambient light coming back in from this side, which is a little unfortunate. And you are getting the reflection off the hair light. What are you? Hang on a second. No, you've not got the hair light in there. Oh yes, you have. You've got the hair light coming up on this side, which would be where the ambient light spill is coming from the other side as well. Right, so let's have a look at yours. And I really like the idea. Having the guitar with music coming out of it is a really interesting one. You mentioned in your additional comments that it would have been a lot simpler if the video and readings had related to the moving light sources being incorporated into the image rather than 3 videos on painting with light. Well, you need those 3 videos on painting with light because you needed 2 light sources for the Rembrandt one. You needed a hair light, which you've missed, and you just used the main light for putting the triangle on the cheek. So that's one of the reasons that you had it. The other one is specifically for this shot, you actually needed to get more light on the guitar so that it's well lit compared to the music notes that you've put in. There were 2 videos in there on using the moving light sources in the video. both the first and the last ones incorporated that, so there's no reason that actually what you said makes particularly much sense. You needed both sets of videos, and had you looked through all of them, then that should have solved the problem. Of course, if you couldn't run one of them, and that you're having links with issues with that, then please email me during the week, and let me know that there's an issue with that, and I will try and get things sorted. Anyway, let's get on to actually having a look at this. So, as I mentioned, it would have been nice to actually have the guitar much better lit, and that would have helped the story. You moved your torch a bit too slowly up here, or maybe back and forth a couple of times, and so you've ended up with a blown out highlight on this section here, and you've actually over recovered it. It's down to about 85%, so it's a muted grey colour. When you're getting highlights, you don't want them blown out, and you still want some detail in them, but you also want the exposure much closer to white than what you had. So I would at least lift up the exposure this way. You also need to give yourself a little bit more room, so that you catch the edge of the guitar, the neck, and also have all of the note in there. And it would have been nice had you given yourself time to draw more than one note as well. If you could have put in a couple of notes and coming off and getting bigger, then that would have added a little bit more to the composition and the way that story is being told as well. So that was, I've already covered the Rembrandt with the fact that you actually needed to put a hair light in, as well as the attempt that you've done on the Rembrandt style. You've also, with this one, got an issue with your exposure as well. And ideally with Rembrandt you want to play around with that contrast behind, so you actually want the background darker, particularly where you've got what he plays with is, and this is additional to the lighting that you were doing, but what he plays with is having dark patches next to areas that are well lit on the other side, and a light patch, and vice versa. And that just means that you're creating as much contrast as you can around your core piece of the subject, and it helps to focus the viewer's attention on that. Right, Anamika, let's have a look at yours, and we'll do your Rembrandt one first, because this was one of the ones that got nailed really well, which is good. Nice triangle on the cheek, and you've also got some hair light in there as well. I would probably play with your colour temperature a little bit. Ooh, no, I wouldn't. You've got some blue light coming in from this side. Possibly, oh, I can't see because that eye isn't a real human, so it's not reflective. Possibly you've got a window or curtain open, which is where your other light source is coming from. So would have been worth pulling that so that the colour balance on the cheek isn't there. Of course, the other option is throw the thing in black and white, and that gets rid of it entirely. In terms of your painting with light one, I love the idea. You've got the idea of the painting a person in there with the light source right, but you also needed to add some extra light onto the shoes that you've put in there, and if we pop up the exposure we can see that, and the statue really wants to be in the middle, floating in the air or something, so that it actually looks like it's being picked up. The other thing you needed to do was get rid of all of this extra area in the foreground where it's quite bright, because that's dragging your eye away from this person. Now, the other thing is, for some reason, the images are a little bit fuzzy. If we crank the exposure up, we can see things are sharp and in focus, but the light source itself is out of focus. I'm wondering if that's because of the torch that you used. It looks like it's got a square LED on it, and that might have been out of focus comparative to where we're where you're actually taking the shot. Best way to deal with that one is to actually put something over the front of it and make it even fuzzier, and that would get rid of the square, turn it into a circle, and it's going to be a little bit easier to paint with. One last thing, and that was your description in terms of why you used the F11 for your depth of field, etc. Was spot on, so well done. Right, Tony, let's have a look at yours, and you've done a stick man inside the car. That is really cool. Particularly like how you've managed to get it so that it actually looks like one hand's on the steering wheel, and you've used the painting with light, a more traditional option for lighting the actual car, which is good. The only thing that I would add to this is it would be great if you had some lines coming off here in terms of speed, like they stick in cartoons, and that would give the whole thing a sense of movement as well. But yeah, you've processed that one nicely. This one here, Rembrandt lighting, yep, you've got the triangle on the cheek. That her nose is really tiny, so you really struggled to get that differentiation, but it is just there. Because you've used a white background, I can't actually see that there's a hair light in there. You really want the hair light coming in from the opposite side, and yeah, the diffusion. The diffuse light source from the background is really lighting up the hair more than anything else. So yeah, you've got the Rembrandt light there, but not the hair light. Right, Daryl, let's have a look at yours. And I really like the idea behind this one. Unfortunately, it's not been executed very well from one standpoint, and that is the lighting on the child. The light on the actual painting with light part is great, but you need a secondary light source on his face so that we can actually engage with the story and what's happening. In the theory, you can probably get away with just, not like that, just lightening things up and playing with the brightness. That's going to be annoying. Let's drop the flow down, because this still needs to be brighter if we're going to try and throw that light onto his face, but we don't want to blow out that area too much. There's still a little bit of detail there. We can always pull the highlights back a little bit. There we go. And that starts to give you something in the way of better composition and eye contact. You still end up with the problem that you've just plonked him smack bang in the middle. If you can get him to tilt sideways slightly so that you've got the ball of lightning here and his face here, and then you set up some tension within the composition, that would be much better than what we've got at the moment, which is just everything focused down on the lightning itself. So yeah, great concept, needs more light, and actually, given if you've got an off-camera flash, just simply tripping a flash from here, really quick exposure with a flash means that you freeze the person in exactly where they are. You'd end up with a little bit of ghosting there, but it would tighten things up a lot, and it would help that story as well. In terms of your Rembrandt one, unfortunately you've got the wrong angle. You've shot with very much straight down. For this lighting to work, you actually need a bounce underneath to bounce the light up and fill up the shadows underneath here. And if memory serves correctly, this is called a butterfly lighting, because of the little butterfly that you get underneath the nose. But it's not Rembrandt. Rembrandt, you need it coming in at 45 degrees on an angle, and then you also ask for a hair light, so yeah, you kind of missed the boat on that one, unfortunately. Right, Dan, well, we'll start with your justification before we go any further, and that is that you didn't include one. You told me about what you were doing with Rembrandt a little bit in terms of just moving you mentioned the hair light back slightly. I'm actually struggling because I can't see a hair light giving you any reflection in here, and the best side for the hair light to be would actually be on this side against the dark background, and the reason for that is it will catch the hair and stop your model from blending into the background. The Rembrandt lighting on here is good. You've got that triangle in just the right place there. There's a little bit of shadowing underneath the eyes, but that's alright, it doesn't matter on this one. I think partly that's just because she's dropped her head down a little bit further, but that helps accentuate the Rembrandt style. So yeah, it's 6 of one, half does the other, isn't it? And neither of those things actually matter in terms of the actual mark. But yeah, I really would have loved to know what was going on with this one. I'm getting the idea that you're playing with the idea of having a picture within a frame, and a portrait even potentially, but having it sitting on this stool doesn't add anything to it, and having all the light going on behind doesn't really add anything. And given you've got the solution to that in Lightroom, that's a bit of, or in Adobe Camera Raw, it's a bit of a shame that you didn't pull back those highlights and just let us concentrate on the fact that it was a portrait that had been drawn by hand. I do like the green and blue swishing through in the background, and along with the splash of the colours as well as the painting. So you've clearly put a lot of work into it, and it's a 112-second exposure. So what's that? Almost 2 minutes. But you didn't tell me why you used ISO 200 or f22 or how you got that long exposure side of it. So please remember to include that type of stuff in your description, and the same with why you chose the composition that you did. All that needs to be in your descriptions. Right, Adrian, let's have a look at yours. And so you've gone for a flower. With the flower, it would have been really nice if you'd actually included it in part of a bouquet of real flowers rather than just having it as the light painting. The task was to have I'll go and grab it, hang on a sec. So you're creating a contemporary image using light drawing and painting. A moving light source should be incorporated into the image, not just the light painted object. So there's an implication there that you're actually painting an object as well, and you've just gone for the light painting itself, and so it doesn't have as much impact as it would if you actually incorporated it into something realistic as well. In terms of your exposure, it looks like you've over recovered this. I'm looking at the exposure there, and that's much closer to a correct exposure where your whites from the light are actually correctly exposed. But I suspect what's happened is you were pointing the torch directly at the camera at this point, and by the time you got out here you were pointing the torch away, and that's changed your brightness. So you needed to, a couple of options. One would have been to put some tissue paper over the top, and that would make it a more multi-directional light, so it wouldn't actually matter where you painted. The other option is to make sure that your torch stays pointing at the camera at all times, and that would keep it equally bright and allow you to go and increase your f-stop, which would give you a cleaner edge to the flower itself. It would have also been nice if you could have actually painted the flower a different colour in the leaves, the green obviously, and actually taken that to the next level. Cropping and composition wise, you've got a lot of negative space on that side and you don't need it. You can actually utilize the rule of thirds coming up this way and then to the center of the flower, and that starts to give it a bit more oomph. I'm not sure that cranking the vibrancy up is a good idea. I was just going to play with it and see what happens if we actually throw a colour into it. That's plain weird, isn't it? Making it all blue is not such a bad idea. Gives it a bit more colour tone. Anyway, So that's that one. Justification was pretty good. You've mentioned about keeping your ISO low, and the fact that you were just struggling with that image being too dark with one light source. I'm not quite sure that that's actually true, because this is classic burnt out center point of the image, so I'm not sure why it. If you send me your raw file, I can have a look at it and see whether or not that's actually the case. On to, I suspect this is Arial, isn't it? And Rembrandt lighting, you've nailed that cheek. Really nice job with the hair light, and you mentioned that you'd put in a little bit of fill light in from a. What did you use? Oh, you were using a small torch for your key ring as your hair light. That's where I was getting my words confused from. But you mentioned that you used your iPhone as a bit of fill light, and you can actually see it. It's just filled in the shadows down here, and so yeah, definitely beneficial from that point of view. And that's nicely executed and nicely composed too. Unfortunately, that's the composition side of things didn't count for the Rembrandt stuff, but you've done that really well. So yeah. Right, Joba, let's have a look at yours, and we'll start with a Rembrandt. You've got the face turned away, so we've got the majority of the light falling on the side closest to us, which is not actually wrong. There's a specific term for it too, which is short lighting is when we're focusing on the side away from us, and I've forgotten the other one, which is the one that you've used. Anyway, it works. You've still got that triangle there, which is good, and you've done a nice job with the hairlight, just picking up that detail in here, which means that she doesn't fade into the background. There is a bit of white around the back that for a full image would be nice to have got rid of. But that's fine. And for your other one, you're painting with light, I really like the story. You've done a nice job of getting the idea there for the angel. I think it would have been better and easier to do had you had somebody to help, because if you could paint the wings behind, you then end up with being able to hold your arm still, which means that you end up with the arms actually being part of the person rather than vanishing and just having the wings, but also being able to actually attach the wings to the back of the person as well. But yeah, if you're doing it on your own, you don't really have much choice on that one. Compositionally, it's pretty good. Would have been nice to see a little bit more of this edge and a little bit more out this way to bring the balance, so that the person wasn't, or the angel wasn't quite smack bang in the middle, but still the gravestone is the major point there, so that works well, and you've got your justification behaving itself nicely, so good job. Right, Lisa, so interesting light painting with this one. I love the fact that you've used multiple colours in there, and I find it quite interesting that your hand, or potentially the object that you were using to light, has given you a little bit more shading in the flower, so you've got almost a multiple set of outlines in there, which is actually quite cool. And the light on the person almost looks like it's a three-dimensional pipe. Maybe that's because of the way that the LEDs worked. It would have still been really nice to actually have something real in here, not just painted, but certainly the change in colour really makes the image work quite nicely from that point of view. You mentioned about it being difficult to work out exactly where you were drawing, and unfortunately you just missed the edge of the hand and legs. I don't think you necessarily needed the legs, but it would have been nice to have this arm included in all of the image. And so the trick with that one is just make it a little bit smaller than you think you need to, and then crop it in once you've finished. Rembrandt one, almost there. The angle the light needs to be pushed back a little bit, so that the triangle that forms when the nose is lit and the shadow that's cast down here is a little bit more accentuated, but you've got the hair light in, and I can see it partly because it's a different color, which is generally not such a good idea, but hey, it means that I can tell that it's there. If you're doing this type of work, again, it's easier to do it on a darker background, and then you get less fill light coming in, so it's easier to actually identify where the light is that you're actually wanting to be there. Right, Rebecca, we'll start with your justification on this one, and you've mentioned that you use 20-second exposure to give you enough time to paint, and you've told me what your settings are for your f-stop and your ISO, but you've not told me why you use those, and you've not told me anything about your composition, and I'm not actually sure what it is that you were trying to do. I'm guessing that they're supposed to be flowers, but you kind of only added one piece to the flower, and then you've done 3 of them, and they're not attached to the vase, so I think you needed to make your stem come down a little bit further as well. But make sure you actually include that type of information in your justification. There's a little bit of banding coming through here, presumably it's the movement of when you were painting stuff, so just go in with your paintbrush in Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw and darken those patches down so that they're not a distraction from that point of view. And again, thinking about composition, what is it that we're trying to focus on? You've just popped your flowers in the center, and they're on a slight angle, so we don't need the stem of the flowers really. We're trying to focus on what's happening up here, so crop in and then get rid of some of the extra distractions that are around in terms of hands and stuff. Ideally, if you don't have any light shining on your hands, then that can be a little bit easier to do, but bike lights spread the light a little bit more than they need to. Yes, your model looks somewhat freaky. You're almost there with the triangle. It's just about there, and you do have the hair light. Be aware that when you're doing this for proper stuff, you want to make sure that you use the light bulbs that are the same type. You've got a very yellow light from the top and a very blue light from the side, and well, it doesn't matter for this one, it does matter in the future. If you using mixed lighting creates quite a big distraction, unless you're doing it very much deliberately. But yes, she looks rather scary, doesn't she? Right, Tricia, let's have a look at yours, and we'll do the Rembrandt first. Yep, triangle spot on there, and really nice job with the hairlight, and your overall exposure is really good, so well done on that one. And your sleeping cat, yeah, the idea works really well. Just a slight glitch with the Z overlapping on this one. This one you've managed to draw really nicely. The other two are a little bit on the messy side, and yeah, just that little tiny bit that would have been worth redoing if the cat hadn't woken up and got annoyed. But story-wise, I really like it. I think possibly changing that colour a little bit would help. And just warming up the overall colour to tone the two together, rather than having them feel like they're a little bit separate. It just helps the whole thing tie in a little bit more together. Well, at least it does for me, so let me know what you think about that. Right, Melanie, let's have a look at yours, and we'll start with your painting with the light one, and yeah, really nice idea. You've managed to light and illuminate the ball really well, in addition to drawing in the soccer player. Part of me really wishes that we could see the rest of him, but it does tell enough of a story without it, and compositionally you've not cropped off any feet or anything, so there's nothing major going on like that. It would have been nice to have the thing on grass, which would have given you that sense of actually playing the ball outside, playing with the ball outside. But the advantage, of course, of doing it inside is you've got a little bit more control. What else was I going to say? Oh yeah, in terms of your justification, you mentioned that you wanted to use ISO 100 because you needed long exposure time and anything higher resulted in overexposure. Yes and no. Remember, you can always increase your f-stop and that will stop the overexposure if you still want to keep the time the same. The reason that you use the low ISO is because of noise and making sure that you don't get noise in the images, and that's particularly important when you're doing long exposure because noise is more prevalent. And if you want to do any adjustment, it's definitely going to start showing up. In terms of your Rembrandt, almost there. Really nice triangle on the face. You did need a hair light coming in from this side to pick up the hair itself, which is a little bit unfortunate. And from a compositional point of view, which of course you're not marked on this time, it would be nice to have give him a little bit more room to look into the image, because otherwise you end up with him looking out, and it just means that your eye line follows his out of the image, and that tends to be where it stays. Makes it harder to come back into the shot, whereas if you give yourself some space to look into, then your eye line you tend to follow it back into the image a little bit more. Okay. Right, Jody, let's have a look at yours. Now, you mentioned in your description that you had a hair light in here. I'm struggling to see where it is. I suspect that there is something there that's just lighting up that corner of her shoulder, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything on her hair, so that's a little bit unfortunate on that one. In terms of the Rembrandt triangle, you've got that spot on. It's a very small triangle at this point, which means the light's coming from the side quite strongly, but you've nailed that part of it, so that's good. In terms of your night painting with light one, I love the fact that you've got this red kind of strobe effect inside the light ball. That's really quite cool. The fact that the moon is so bright and you've gone for a long exposure feels like it's almost daylight and not quite as surreal as the effect could be. And I've just been playing around with it. I think if you actually pull out some of the vibrancy, it really picks up the fact that the orb is there, and makes it feel a little bit more nighttime-ish. If we go into the hue saturation levels, we can actually increase the reds again to draw that eye, to draw your eye back to this piece. And then I'd probably actually go and play with the split toning. Where are we split toning? And put a little bit of blue into some of that nighttime, just to make it feel like it really is a night shot, and give it a bit more character than it had previously. Yeah, it still works nicely as it was, but I'll create the virtual copy and hit reset so you can see the difference between the two. Just brings out the contrast with what you're doing with the orb a little bit more, and makes it feel a little bit more eerie, and yeah. So anyway, hopefully that helps. Okay, and I think that is everybody for this week. It is too. Okay, so I'll leave you guys in peace after I upload this lot, and hopefully you find some of that feedback useful. Catch you guys later. Bye.